I'd like to show you how to use some of the designs, and this is a free design on our website. It's a swag design, continuous swag, so that you can stitch this out across your quilt and have swags, not have to use rulers, just let the quilt, the machine do it for you. So first off, I've brought the swag design in, and if we look at it, it is width of 6.8 and height of 3.4. And I would like this swag to be more longer than stretched out. So we're going to do some manipulating with our size. And to do that, I want to take it to repeat pattern and skew to fit. And skew to fit, well, first off, I think I'm going to take it back, and I want this swag I want to mirror it because I'm putting it at the top of my border. So I want to use the mirror vertical, and it'll just flip that. And the yellow dot is my start point, so I want to make sure that that's where I'm going to start on the left side of my quilt. So now we're going to take it into our skew to fit, repeat pattern skew to fit. And the first thing I need to do is decide how wide my quilt is to put this on the top. Okay, I want to move my machine over right to this line because that's where I want my first stitch to start. And if I start it here, then I want to press reset home so that it zeroes out my counter, my measuring point to 0. And then I'm going to move it across my fabric, and I could move it at an angle and find my height as well, but I'm going to put in a height that I want. So we'll move this across over to the line. This is where I'm going to put the swag. And now I want to lock my motors so that I have that measurement. It's 28.02. That's the measurement that I need to fit this swag in, and this is the measurement of the swag. I want my swag to be 3 inches, and so I'm going to put the height, change that to 3, and this is the full size that I'm putting a swag. Now if I don't change my number of swags across, I would have one long swag across, and that wouldn't be very pretty. So let's start previewing some designs. One width of this is 6.8. 6 goes into 28, 4 plus some. I'm going to actually put in about 8 swags and fit to the area. Okay, now if I decide, well, maybe I want those a little longer, let's put in 10 swags and do it again. And so they're a little deeper swag, or not as wide each swag, but maybe I want 5. So that's half of what I just did. So they're going to stretch them. So it's kind of your preference on what you would like your swags to look like. I think I'm going to leave them at the 5, and then we're going to go back in and put some different elements in it. So I'm ready now to position this swag onto my quilt. So I'm finished. The one thing about this, as long as you don't leave this screen, you can keep previewing new designs, or not new designs, but new repeats, amount of repeats in there. But once I leave, push done. Once I leave and go back, it sets that. Now it's time to position. So I want to go to the reposition pattern, and now I'm going to move my machine over to where I want that start point to be, and we'll use one of these functions. I'm going to bring my machine back to the start point. If I place my needle right where I want that to start, and then on the screen, if I press Find Start Point, it places my start point right where at the crosshairs. So the crosshairs represent my needle, and they're all positioned correctly now. And now it's time to start quilting. Before I start quilting, I want to make sure this fits within the area that I gave it. So I want to disable my motors, and I have my follow checked, so it's highlighted, and I'm going to zoom in on this a little bit so I can see where things are. Okay, I know that my border is larger than the swag, so I have some extra quilting space in here, and that's what I'm going to use later for another design. And as I go across here, I know that it's following all the way across. I can check things out, making sure everything fits. So when I press follow, it puts my crosshairs in the center of my screen and lets the design flow underneath it. So the one that's important is to come to this end point and to check, and if I want to really zoom in and make sure that that's exactly where I want it. And we're lined up, perfect. Okay, we're ready to stitch this out. I can leave this screen, run quilt, and start quilting. I have my tie-offs checked, my pull-up, my stitching, and I can go ahead and start stitching. But I want to check my settings to make sure. I don't like my stitches at 15 stitches per inch, so I can change that. I'm going to change it to 12. I like my machine speed at 50 because as I start a design, I don't know how fast it's going to stitch, so I'd rather have it stitch a little slower, and then if I want it to move up in speed, then I can change that on as we're going. Tie-offs are 2 stitches, and I'm not going to have my pause delay on because it's not going to be stitching over where my start point was. I don't have the auto pull up on. I'm going to go ahead and let it just take a stitch, and I can, with the machine, move the machine aside. So we're ready to start quilting. It moved to the point. It took that first stitch and it disabled the motors. So I can manually pull up my bobbin thread and then resume. Now it's going to do my tie-off. So you can see how slow that's going, but that helps. Sometimes it helps to let it go slower so that it keeps the smooth design. The faster it goes, sometimes it kind of sends it, just makes it a little shaky. But this design is really nice because it's one design, stitches over, stitches back to the point here, and then starts my next design. As the machine is stitching, I have the capability to zoom in or zoom out or pan. Or I can go in and change my speed and speed that up, and this design probably needed to be optimized so it would stitch faster. I could slow it way down so it really stitches slow, and that's great to slow things down if you're going to a point and you want to make sure you get to that point so you've got better control. I can change my stitch length, and if I wanted to make the stitches longer, now it'll do a longer stitch or shorter. I could change and add a pause delay, which I wouldn't need to on this. Or I could change my tie-offs or actually turn that tie-off on so when it gets to the end, it doesn't do a tie-off. And we're back to the view. Okay, we're finished, and now it'll do the tie-off because I left that checked. And now I can disable my motors, move my machine aside, and bring up my bobbin thread. Isn't that beautiful? Now let's put some vertical channel lock lines, or piano keys as we call it, along our swags. So the first thing we want to do is decide how wide we want the lines to be as they go down here. And I think I want mine to be 1/2 inch. And so this design right here is about 6 inches and 6.58. I measured it. So we'll just check this out. Reset home, move this across to my first swag, and that gives me, about 5.56. I was wrong with that. 5.56. So if I make these about a 1/2 inch, I could do them a 1/2 inch across, and they'd pretty well be even all the way. So now what I want to do is go back to my beginning and start right there, right where my line is. Want to bring up my bobbin thread, and I want to lock my machine, my motor, so it doesn't move. Now I'm ready to go to Quilt, to my channel lock, my manual channel lock, and I want to do the vertical. The vertical is up and down. So if I start and do the vertical, and now moving my machine, it'll come right down. And if I use a fine thread, I can stitch right back over the top of that and it won't look real bulky. And I can go right out to the edge, and then I don't need to worry about traveling across my arc. I'm going to go to horizontal channel lock and reset home to 0 because I want to go across a 1/2 inch. So if I'm in my outside border and I go past a little more than a 1/2 inch, I can go back and it won't be seen in the stitching. So I want to just stitch this. See, I went past a little bit. We want to go right back to about there. 4/9 is fine. Now again, I want to do the vertical channel lock and then stitch down to my swag, just to the point of the swag. Then I'm going to go right back over the top of that line. Stop. Now I'm ready to reset home to 0 again. Horizontal channel lock across, and I'll do that to about a 1/2 inch again. Right there. Change my vertical channel lock. Now I'll stitch my fabric down again to the swag. Back on that line again. Change to the horizontal, reset my home to 0, stitch across, 2, 5, there we go. Vertical channel lock again and go down. And that's the way you can get it all the way across this swag. I'd like to teach you how to do clamshells. It's a very traditional design and can be done on lots of quilts as an edge-to-edge design, and we can make it continuous line. The one thing about clamshells is as we do this design and then we take the second row, we have to offset the second row about 50% so that it hits right in the center. So we're going to learn how to do that. The first thing I want to do is bring in my design, and I want to mirror it because I want my, rather than the smile, I want it to be a frown. So I'm just going to go ahead and mirror it so that it's turned over and my start point is there. And now I want to resize it. Go to my resize screen, and in the resize screen, if we look up here, we can see that the width is twice the height, and I want to make sure that it stays that way. And so I want to resize it and keep the aspect ratio correct. So if I put my height at 1.5, then when it resizes, keeping the aspect ratio, it will be 3 inches because the height is half of the width, and you can see that right there. I'm not working with my width, I'm only working with the height, and then it resizes it correctly on the width. Okay, we're ready now to repeat it across the quilt. Going to repeat, and rather than the skew to fit that I really like using, I'm going to do repeat, normal repeat, and I'm just going to put in 10 repeats across on this quilt. So if my quilt was 30 inches, 10 would work perfect. If my quilt was 34 inches, then I would put in probably 12 so that it stitched off the sides a little bit, because I want to keep my aspect, my one shell at 1.5 in height and 3 inches in width. So I'm not going to do any skewing. So I'm going to go ahead and repeat that. And now I have 10 across there, and I'm ready to position those and stitch it out on the quilt. That is my first row. What I want to do first, though, is I'm going to save it. So I'm going back to my library, and I'm going to save that in, and it will be saved wherever I have it, and it's in QuiltCAD Continuous Line. That's where I found it. So I'm going to just put clam 1. So that's row 1, and save it. Now I'm going to load it again. And go to Quilt and mirror it, vertical. And then I need to resize it because I'm making a whole new design. So resize it to 1.5 in height and keep my aspect ratio. And then I will take it in to repeat again. And in my repeat, the first repeat, I'm going to repeat it one more repeat than I did on my first row. So I did my first row is 10, my second row will be 11. And repeat, and there's my 11. Now I want to save that, back to my library, save changes, in the QuiltCAD Continuous Line, and when these are saved, they will be saved as a TAP file, a temporary file, and that's row 2. I have now saved that. Now,